Thank you very much, Steve. And yes, Steve already mentioned that Rukia and Elizabeth have been involved in the LPAC British Council project for the last year. And it's great that they've done their whole project centered around the idea of assessment, which is such a huge area that we all need to get to grips with. You can see the pictures of the two ladies here. Rukia is actually in the dark because she has no electricity, so you might not be able to see her during the webinar. Rukia is a facilitator with over 5 years' experience in ELT. She's the project coordinator of this British Council project this year with LPAC and co-administrator and facilitator. She's been doing a lot of hard work there. She also works a lot on global and emerging issues with learners and community members, and she runs the English conversation clubs. And she's also got various open certifications in teaching English as a second language. One of the very interesting things that Rukia also does is that she's an advocate and facilitator of trauma-sensitive classroom curriculum design. Very interesting work. And then we have Elizabeth. She's a teacher of over 13 years experience in the Kenyan public secondary school system, now teaching at a boarding school. She's also written various course books, English language and literature, for the 844 and the CBC curriculars, and they'll tell you about this change in LPAC from one to the other. And she's got several open certifications, and she's also an alumni of the 1 Million Teachers Programme. So I'd like to hand over to Elizabeth and Rukia.
Hello. As Rukia is getting ready, maybe I'll just go through the objectives and then Rukia will pick it up from there. We hope today, as we talk to you, that we'll be able to cover these objectives. We wish to discuss the features of assessment, generally speaking. What is assessment? What does it contain? We also want to take you through assessment in Kenya. Where did we begin and where are we at this particular point? As we do that, we hope to share with you, you've heard of the LPAC British Council project that we have run. So we wish to share with you the impacts of that project to us as teachers in Kenya, the successes we've been able to come up with, and also a little bit about the challenges that we have faced throughout the year that we were running the project. Finally, we will get you to compare what we have in Kenya. Maybe you can compare that with what you have in your own countries, in your own schools, in your own classes. And we'll see where we can touch base, and we'll see where we do the same thing or where we can learn from each other. We hope at the end of the day that all these objectives will be met. So let me hand over to Rukia to take you through the first part of this presentation, and I shall pick up later. Welcome, Rukia. Rukia?
I think she's not here. I think she must have dropped out. Could you carry on until she comes back? Is that okay, Elizabeth?
Okay, we can continue. Sorry for that. I think Rukia is having some problems with electricity today. So beginning from the top of everything, please share what you think on the chat as we go along. When we talk about assessment for a teacher, as you are going through the process of imparting knowledge, when you think about assessment, what really comes to mind? What do you feel about it? You can share in the chat and we can pick it up from there as we move on to the next slide. Linda, thank you. Assessment takes such a long time. As you're moving on, I can see what you're writing. Now, in education, we talk about assessment as a variety of methods and tools that we educators use majorly to evaluate and measure the progression of skills from the learners that we have before us. They walk into our patronage, having skills of a certain level. We interact with them, and at some point, we part our ways. Now, when we part ways, how much have we assisted this learner? That is assessment. If they came in with a particular skill, how far has that been developed? The feedback that you get from that change in skill or acquisition of knowledge, that implies assessment. However you do it, you're looking for feedback on whether this learner has grown under your care or whether this learner has diminished. And I know every teacher's dream is to make sure that a student becomes better under their patronage. Next slide. Now, an overview of different types of assessments. In the poll, most of us were comfortable with what an assessment is. And as we walk into our classrooms and we interact with our learners, the biggest question that most of our heads ask is, how far have you accomplished the task that was given to you? Now, how you report this is determined by the type of assessment that you choose to go with. Are you going to do formative assessment, in which case, from the moment you start interacting with a student to the very final day, you are continuously giving them quizzes or having discussions or putting them in groups where they can discuss by themselves. And at the end of the day, there's a feedback that you get. That is formative assessment. You are testing these learners at every spot of knowledge acquisition. However, you could also choose to do this assessment at the end of a topic. You could do it at the end of a period. In Kenya, we talk about end of term exams, or you could be giving standardized exams. In that case, we're not talking about formative assessment. We're now talking about summative assessment. How is that?
Rukia is now back in, Elizabeth. Would you like to, Rukia, are you ready to take over? Because I know this is your part.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm having a power blackout. Thanks, Elizabeth, for starting off.
It's okay, Rukia. You can continue from there. I was looking at the different types of assessments.
Oh, thank you. So we are talking about the different types of assessment, which Elizabeth has talked about. The formative assessment, that is the continuous, maybe at the beginning of the term, beginning of lesson, and such like. It includes things like quizzes. I don't know how often you use such formative assessments. You can keep sharing in the chat. We have the summative assessment that comes maybe at the end of the term, and at times also at the end of a particular school year, for example, at the end of a primary section or such like. Then we nowadays have the alternative assessment, and especially with the curriculum movement from the, like in Kenya, we are moving from the 844 curriculum that had learners study 8 years in primary school, 4 years in secondary, and 4 years in tertiary. Now we are in the competency-based curriculum, and that is maybe happening also in Uganda, I think Tanzania. I don't know what's happening in your country, whereby we are embracing alternative assessment, and we'll get to see more as we move. Yeah, thank you. We can move to the next slide. I see some charts. Someone is saying formative assessment within the term and summative within at the end of the year. Thank you, Nathaniel. Let's move to the next slide. So in the alternative assessment, we have examples such as self-assessment. And here you find learners, rather than teachers, they rate themselves, like peer assessment. So for example, if you're talking about self-assessment of a task that you gave them to write an essay, and they're assessing themselves to see how far they are. They ask themselves, for example, have I done the introduction? How is my conclusion? And such like things. So have you ever tried alternative assessment in your class? Please share in the chat. If you have, you may also say which one you have done. And there's a link here from the British Council Resources that talks more about self-assessment. You can look at that maybe later during your free time. So we can move to the next slide. All right, yeah. So I know there's one question that teachers ask themselves at times: how do I do a good assessment? And assessment can be complicated, but at times it's always good to, we keep on learning and evolving insofar as assessment is concerned. There are features that can make your assessment good, And there are some features that when they are missing, then that assessment can be maybe here or not really what you want it to be. So one of the features is the issue of transparency. And when we talk of transparency, for example, do you use things like rubrics? Okay, do you use things like rubrics so that you let your learners know that this is what I expect at the end of this assessment. This is what I'll be looking for, so that now they know exactly what you expect of them, and it is fair and it is open and clear. Okay. Another thing is authenticity. How authentic is your assessment? To what extent are you using issues that they can relate with, the day-to-day issues that they can relate with when you do your assessment? It's also very important. Then we have issues such as washback and reliability. We have validity. We have practicality. And when we talk of washback, for example, what is the impact of the assessment that you're giving? So this could be, we've seen we have formative, summative, alternative assessment. So when we're talking of washback, does this, it means what is the impact of the assessment that you're giving? Is it testing maybe 21st century skills or the like? Okay. When we're talking about practical nature of the assessment, for example, are you giving them enough time to submit that assessment? For example, you've given an essay. Do you expect them that at the end of your lesson, they should have finished that assessment and handed in their essays? So how practical will that be? For example, in Kenya at times, now that we are moving to the competency-based curriculum, teachers are still getting used to how to implement this curriculum, and the British Council resources and the project that we've done has really helped some of the teachers to be able to work with this new system. So you find that at times they send a learner home with an assessment that requires maybe sourcing of materials that should take a number of days, but they want it the following day. So how practical is that? So as you're saying, assessment can be complex, but as much as possible, there are features that if we try, we can make our assessments better. So we can move to the next slide. So these are examples of reliable tests over the years. I don't know if you have come across some of this. Here we have something called NEC, that is Kenya National Examination Council, that do assessments for Kenya as a country. So I don't know how your country does assessment. How reliable can you say the assessments in your country are? And maybe you can share in the chat, as I also maybe check one or two comments in the chat. Yeah, I see Mustafa says, yes, each assessment has its own advantage, and yeah, it's very true. Assessment is so complex. Linda says, GMAT is a familiar one to me. Nathaniel, oh, thank you. All right, so as you reflect on that, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so even as assessment complexity is something that we all agree with, there's something that at times teachers and parents also see. At times we actually teach to the test. And that is what was happening in Kenya when we had the 844 system. You can just take a moment or a second and read through this. So what for example, sparked the need to move the curriculum from what we had previously in Kenya to what we are now saying the competency-based curriculum is that the previous assessment, which we are still facing out, was very exam-oriented, to the extent that after the results, you would find different reactions from learners. So you find teachers going to class and they really just want their learners to pass the exam. So there are some aspects in the teaching or assessing for learning that doesn't happen the way it should have been. So we can move as we explore further the effects of teaching to the test. Can move to the next slide. Okay, some of the disadvantages of teaching to the test, and you can also place others in the chat, and you can also read through some of this from where you are. Take notes of what you feel really you want to look at further. And one of the things is also, it actually brings about poor collaboration among learners, because what they want, it becomes very competitive. So everyone wants to be the best, and the aspect of collaboration actually misses out in a way. You find that teachers are more centered towards the textbook reliance. So the aspect, you remember we talked about the features. Teachers rely on textbook only. They don't look at their surroundings. They don't look at learners' experiences and all that. So it has its disadvantages. And I believe you can think of other disadvantages that probably you can share in the chat. So we can move to the next slide. I see Linda says, if exams are good, but if exams are good, for example, communicative exams, then it's useful to prepare for them. Thank you, Linda, for that. So other concerns about assessment, aspects such as what we already talked about, the issues of if an assessment lacks some of these features, it can be disadvantageous because, for example, if an assessment is not valid or is not open and authentic, it might not really measure exactly what it is that you want measured. Then also the lack of knowledge on how to prepare good assessments, because that can also be a challenge. So I don't know which other concerns you can think of in terms of assessment from your context. What are some of the things you can think about that pose a challenge insofar as assessment is concerned? And place in the chats. Okay, I see. Linda says some assessments are not the right level. Another disadvantage could be that everyone gets bored, students and teachers. Yeah. Mulalem, sorry if I've not pronounced your name well. The number of students, time can be a factor. Thank you so much for sharing with us. So we can move further and see what we have next. Okay, so when we look at our journey, I already shared that we are transitioning from the 844 system that we had learners doing 8 years in the primary level, and then 4 years in the secondary level, which is now the senior secondary, and then 4 years in tertiary. So this is now being transitioned to the competency-based curriculum. And the beauty about now the competency-based curriculum is that it's really bringing in the aspect of localized practices, such as the recognition of challenges that learners are facing. So here we see the aspect of authenticity comes in. These are some photos whereby we were planting trees with learners. And in some cases, we were even asking the learners to do what? To write essays about the trees, about the effects. So you see, it was very interesting for them because these are things they see in their environment. So that familiarity really helped to make the assessment even better because they can relate to what it is that they are being asked to do. So we can move to the next slide. Now, when we look at the LPAC projects that was looking at assessment and feedback from 2024-2025, it has really helped teachers. And as I had said before, you find that now that we are moving from, initially, even before the movement from one curriculum to the other, there was the challenge of transitioning from college to practice. So that was an issue. So now moving to another curriculum altogether, teachers are getting challenges on how to now implement this new curriculum. So this particular project, the aim was to look at assessment and feedback and improve it, and help teachers also come up with their own assessments and feedback methods, and also look at assessment for learning. So we reached out to over 300 teachers of English from across Kenya. And what they did is they looked at various ways in which they would assess, for example, use of group discussions in the classroom, the use of blog for feedback, both peer feedback and teacher to learner, learner to learner, and all that. And there's a link here to our YouTube channel that can be shared in the chat, and you can look more into some of the things we were doing, the different webinars every month, like monthly webinars and all that, that will give you more information as to the resources that we were sharing with our learners. And they were adapting British English resources to the, teaching English resources to the their contexts. So we can move to the next slide and see specific examples of how teachers looked at these resources and adapted them to their classrooms. This was when we had a session with teachers in a workshop, in an in-person workshop. And actually they were talking about how they gave feedback to their learners and how they used technology. Some were sharing how they used AI to make their own exams, and how after they got the results from the AI, they were able to adapt it and also make amendments according to how they wanted it to look like. And these are things that they also got from the teaching English resources. There is one teacher who was sharing that at some point when they were using AI, actually she noticed that the learners were using AI when she told them to go and do an AC. So what she did is that she asked them to do a role play on the same. So this helped her make sure that even if they use AI, then they still internalize whatever it is in terms of the content that she wanted them to internalize. I was reading, in the next slide, we will see, I was reading content that one of the teachers used. And part of it was talking about how at some point when technology started coming in, some teachers were feeling that technology will take over the role of teachers. And that time, that was a calculator. So they learned later to be able to look at calculators in ways that can help both teachers and learners. Same to now what we have in terms of AI. So one of our teachers, who is called Helen Gige, says in a feedback survey that we were looking at, is that she said that I gave assignments in class to test on what the learners knew prior to teaching. And she actually used technology from the British Council resources. And she was looking at how to bring in AI in her classroom in a way that would be meaningful to the learners. So she wanted to know which resources do they use from the AI that could help them in their reading, in their speaking, you know, like changing text to speech and vice versa, and such like examples. So I don't know how many of you have used such technology, and maybe share which technology you've used insofar as AI is concerned. You can share in the chat. Someone says, Kefiale say, the way we assess affects our overall assessment. It takes time to clearly assess. Yeah. The same way we say that assessment can be very complicated. And one other teacher, Violet Aura, what she did, she adapted an activity she saw in the British Council resources. It was for remote sessions, but what she did, she used it with her learners who did it in person in the compound, in the school compound, whereby they actually, the learners went and interviewed fellow students, and they posted those in the TikTok. So you see, this is a form of assessment whereby they can get feedback from each other, from the messages that come in from the inboxes and even the reactions and all that. So this project was very useful to our teachers and continues to build them. And there is more feedback, as you shall see, as my colleague shares in the next slide. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Rukia. It's good to see your face. Seems like your lights are back for a moment or so. Now, continuing in the same breath with what Rukia was saying, we had Hadija Ismail, and Hadija was focusing on items that she picked from the British Council. And she says she used the reading race. There's a link to that will be provided for you, and you can look at it more. And on top of that, she used ChatGPT, and she says this was for preparation for her lesson and for text analysis. If you are doing writing and for example, you want to teach your learners how to bring up a really good paragraph, this is something that you could take to ChatGPT. You'll make very elaborate paragraphs. They could just be small, but once you teach your learners how to prompt ChatGPT, then this can come out, and then that is what you use to teach them. If you're talking about the topic sentence, you're talking about the body, you're talking about the summary, that can clearly come out. Nuru is also one of our very good teachers, and Nuru was watching a video. She had these learners that were really reluctant to speak in English, and she was wondering why this was. She didn't understand this until she went to the British Council website and watched a video that elaborated on speaking of English. Once she watched that video, she was able to understand the limitations that were keeping her students from freely speaking in English, and so she could use that. You see, that is feedback. My students have this issue. They're having difficulty here. Now I know. So what do I do with it? So the assessment that you do can actually help you to plan more on how you are going to move your student from one skill level to the next. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we have a video here, and because of time, we might not play it, but there's a link to it. It can be put on the chat and you can watch it later. Now, what is in the video was the culmination of this LPAC project that we were doing. As Rukia said, we had an in-person meeting. And within that video, the lady that you see and so many other teachers that are within the video were able to share about their successes and their challenges. This is where we picked out what our teachers actually took from the British Council website, how they took back that to their classes, how they use this with the capability of their learners, with the regions that they come from. Kenya is a big country, and different parts of Kenya have different tribes and different types of learners. So you could take an item, use it where I am. I'm in a place called Siaya. Rukia is in Mombasa. We can actually now bring it back to the level of our learners. And in this video, teachers were able to share. The mention of AI was very elaborate. Those who tried it, did it work? Did it not work? Rukia mentioned before the use of blogs. There are people who are very successful with blogging as an aspect of assessment. And so when you look at the video, it will be clear and you'll understand more why we feel that this project was timely, why we feel this project came at the right time, because as we are moving from what we've called 844 before to this competency-based curriculum, the struggle for teachers is real. And so when you get an opportunity like this and teachers share, they're able to learn from one another and then take that back to their learners to make it better. So make sure you have a look at that and see how it can help you in your own journey with your learners back home where you're from. Next slide. Now, we chose to share with you because we were moving from one curriculum to the next. We took one of what we thought was one of the ways that we made our assessment work for us, and we just wanted to share that with you in hopes that you'll be able to take it and maybe use it one way or the other. Degef, I see what you're saying on the charts, that all types of assessments are very important. I agree with that, so long as you're able to tailor it to your learners and what somebody said earlier in the charts, you're able to use it for a specific reason. Now, we took a staff room poster from the British Council website. Kenya has a system where we teach literature as a very big aspect of English as a language, and they get to read books, literary books, and they analyze those. Sometimes we focus on, as you can see on the screen, characters. We talk about the themes in these books. We talk about stylistic devices and their manipulation of language. And this was something we tried out with our outgoing class. And so we used the staff room poster for teaching of literature. And this is how we broke it down so that the assessment could be very positive for us, so that we could collect correct data on how they were finding the learning of literature or the literary books that we're working on. So what you do is you take a large class and you apportion this class into smaller groups, and then you can take these smaller groups and you assign them these little subtopics that we have on the screen, in the hopes that one group can cover one area, another group can cover another, and the third one do another. Then they come back together as a whole class and share what they have learned. We can see this in the next slide of how we actually broke it down. You can tailor this as we move to that slide. You can tailor this not just to your literary books, but you can talk about it, or you can use it with your teaching of, if you're talking about languages, your teaching of texts, reading text passages. You could pick on vocabulary. That is another subtopic that you could talk about. So you've grouped your learners, like I said, and then you have assigned them a section of the text to work on. You give them a time limit, and within that time limit, depending on how many they're in a group, they get to discuss based on the topic they've been given. If it is about vocabulary, they follow the direction that you've given them. If you've given them guiding questions, they use those to discuss. Then they come up with their own feedback. Then you allow now our tiny classes, our tiny groups to combine as one. And then now they share. This is what we learned about characters. This is what we learned about vocabulary. This is how we construct sentences. So now they're sharing as a group. The teacher is on the side. You're giving these learners the ability to show you what they understand, what they don't understand, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And that is assessment, because that is what you're looking for. And so once that is done, you surely then have an assessment and a clear picture of what your learners are. And you can use that as a basis for the next lesson, for an exam that you want to give them and everything else. If you go back to the website with the link that we have, that picture on the extreme end is what you're going to see. It's an example of that staff room poster. You can tailor that to whatever you will be handling. Next slide. Now, our other curriculum, which we moved to then, which now is what we are more concerned with, is the CBC, which is the competency-based curriculum, where we are focusing on nurturing the abilities of learners based on their talents, based on their interests. So we still took another poster, but this now we were using for an assessment of reading in the lower classes. And if you look at the website and you look at this particular poster, this is one that you can use for, the one that we have on the link is used for fairy tales, but of course you can customize that to whatever you're teaching. We are using the read aloud technique because you want to assess the learner's ability to read, but your assessment will not be on the reading alone. It will go through to vocabulary use, it will go through to morals in the story and so many other things that you will see in the next slide. But before you get these learners into that assessment, you have to prepare them, you have to activate their knowledge, you have to show them that this is the book we're going to read. Maybe it's just a cover of the book and you're asking these learners, what do you expect? What are you predicting that your story is going to be about? Or you can share the synopsis, a very summarized version of the story to prepare them for what they will read within the lesson. If we move to the next slide, we can see what that looks like. So after you prepare them, then these learners are ready for the read aloud technique. And as a teacher, these are your assessment areas. You have prepared, and so you're asking yourself, at what point will I pause? And when I pause, which question am I going to ask? Because it's assessment, so the question you ask will determine the answer that you get, and so the feedback that comes with it. And at what point will I want the students to stop reading and they start talking? At what point am I assessing pronunciation? At what point am I assessing comprehension, meaning of words? We keep saying that assessment is complex. It is indeed complex, and it's about how you approach it, what you want out of it, what kind of feedback you're looking for. So if you ask the right questions, then you're definitely going to get the right answers, and you will have a very good assessment, be it formative or summative. That's why that test is very important, because what you ask the learners and how you ask it, somebody said in the chat, determines what you get. After the read aloud, you're moving on to the moral of what you have taught. And so which questions are you asking? What virtues have your learners picked up? If they give you the correct answers, then you know that you have done the right job. But if they are tinkering with what to say and how to say it, that is still feedback. And so you know what to do with it, because feedback can be negative and it can be positive. We have a link for you there that you can look at. You will find that little picture on Little Red Riding Hood. You don't have to teach Little Red Riding Hood. You can tailor it to a story that focuses on your culture, a story that talks about your country and where you come from. But the idea is, as I'm assessing this reading, then how do I do it and how do I ensure that I get the right feedback? Next slide. We've spoken so much about how this project was really important to us, and I'd like to hear from you, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. We have taught for so many years, as we are here today, and we have tried different types of assessment. If you could share with me on the charts what you think about assessment, what challenges you're facing with assessment in your own classrooms. And you can even go further and tell us how you deal with that assessment that you're talking about. Now, John Hetty said, Rashida, I hope you can hear me now. You said you can't hear me. Rukia, I don't know if, Linda, I don't know if I'm loud enough or that's a problem.
Yeah, your sound is fine.
Okay, so maybe Rashida, please check your connection. Now, John Hattie said that the greater the challenge, the higher probability that one seeks and needs feedback. But more importantly, if you need that feedback, then you need a teacher to provide that feedback for you. This is the bridge for you between the students and the society, between the students and the test. It's the teacher that is there. It's the teacher that knows how to get this feedback. It's the teacher that knows what to ask, how to ask, and then how to deal with that feedback that is there. This tells you the important role that teachers play, and that is why this project was very important to us. If you empower this teacher, then chances are that the feedback that you get can be used to better our learners in our societies, that is one. Wiggins also added that the more that you teach without finding out who understands the information and who doesn't, then there's a likelihood that only students who are already proficient, who already know, are the ones who are going to succeed. This, I think, goes to the heart of assessment. Why are you doing assessment? How do you use the feedback that you get from assessment? Like I said when I was beginning, if you only change the life of a student who's already good enough and you don't help the one who has maybe a deficiency here or there, then you might not be doing the right thing. And so we need to think about that as we delve deeper into assessment. And so as a teacher, you're thinking, why? What's the challenge? Why can't I get to this learner? And why can't I get to that other learner? Finally, Collier says, success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in, day out. Tell me in the chats if you agree with what Collier said, and if this is something that has worked for you. Where you started from to where you are there changes that you have effected? Small, maybe they are, but that have amounted to something tremendous. Molly Delmi says, sometimes students don't understand the questions in the assessment. And so that comes back to the teacher. How else can you phrase that question so that the students can understand it? Alia in the chat says it is very important to seek for feedback for proper evaluation and checkup. And I agree with that, because the feedback determines what you actually do in the end. Now, some of the challenges that we realized as we sat in Mombasa for our face-to-face meeting, I think I agree with what the poll said, that one of the biggest challenges was the classroom size. Some of the schools where we teach in, those classes are big. You're carrying up to 70 students at any given time, and you want to ensure that each of them are able to attain what you're looking for. So that is something very important. But aside from the big classes, we also realized that limited access to the internet and IT equipment was a very big problem. Kenya, again, is very modern, but then there's a part of Kenya that is very interior, that lacks sometimes electricity and stuff like that. And so when you want to interact with students over the internet, it becomes a challenge. However, we found a way to overcome that. I'll tell you just in a minute. There was also this struggle for teachers with these AI tools that we are talking about. Some of them had heard about ChatGPT just when we were meeting. And there were those who were talking about, I have used SurveyMonkey, I've used Kahoot, and so many other tools that we are using wherever we are coming from. I don't know, share with me on the chats which ones you have used in your classes. Have they been successful? Are there those that you have heard about and you wish to try out? We can share in the chats and encourage each other. So with this, so many tools, we were able to go through one or two and show teachers which ones can go for summative evaluations and which ones can be used for formative evaluations. As we move to the next slide, what we realized was that the challenges were endless. We could have spoken about challenges for 2-3 days and would never come to the end. And so our focus was on what do we do? If you're saying that you lack equipment, what do you do? If you get one laptop, which probably belongs to one teacher, is there a way that you can use it with your 70 students? Thank you on the chat. I see people have used ChatGPT. Somebody says, yet it is very important to give motivable feedback. And someone says there's a very big difference, I think, from Kenya and Ethiopia. We'd love to hear about that at some point. And we also felt where those machines were not there, where projectors were not there, then what could the teacher use? Because all these resources are in the British Council website. If you took them, was there a way in which you could bring them to the learners? Could you use a talking wall, for example? Could you have an English corner? Just a blackboard where learners what they're thinking. And that is still feedback, you'll still find it. So we encourage our teachers to go back to the British Council website, pick what would work for them, whether it was a chart, whether it was a magazine, whether it was a story, take it and then find the best way to ensure that it reaches your learners, because it would bring a lot of change. Linda says, I agree, the challenges are endless with assessment, but that is what a teacher's life is. You meet the challenges and you find a solution, because that is what is required. If we move to the next chart, the next slide, sorry. Having said everything that we have said, we felt that this project really empowered the teachers of Kenya. That is why we needed to share with you. And so after speaking to you, we are hoping that you go back to this learning toolkit at the British Council website. There's a lot there. I think for me as a teacher, the excitement was there when I kept saying so many things. Go back there, pick one or two that you can try out. You can try the posters that we have suggested, or any other thing. There's a link there that you can follow, and try and put it in your classrooms where you come from, whichever country that is, whichever area that is. Pick one or two and you try to make it work. Degefa says, our Ethiopian, I believe he means Ethiopia has poor teaching methods. If you log on to the website, there are a couple of things that you can try out that could ensure that that becomes better. Najeshi says, sure, the challenges are endless, I agree. And Nuru says, you can use printed formats if facilities are inadequate. That is true. get it from the website, print it, and then use it in class. I think that's it for now. I'll hand it over to Linda. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Rukia. Yeah, I'd just like to remind everyone, please, to try one of these things before the Telegram English Connects discussion on Friday, next Friday. Elizabeth and Rukia will be joining the Telegram group then and discussing these things. If you have any extra questions, then please try out the posters, look at the assessment for Learning toolkit, and bring your own questions. We've got some time for questions now. So there have been a few in the chat so far. So is Rukia back again, or is she not around? If you can find
I'm
her.
here.
You are. Good. Okay, great. So one of the questions, the first question, oh yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much for the lovely content linking what you've done in Kenya with assessment in general, which is so interesting to see the examples. What I really liked was the actual responses and the feedback from the teachers, because this is where we see assessment in practice, don't we? We see what works, what doesn't, and what real teachers think about trying out these assessment methods. And I loved your practical examples, the poster, for example, and comparing it with different educational systems, which you can do now. The question we had was, and any more questions, please add them in the chat. The question we had was, how can you make summative assessment differentiated and scaffolded? Rukia or Elizabeth, would you like to tackle that one?
Elizabeth, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can take a bit of it and you can fill it in once I'm done. You're still thinking about who are my learners. You're still thinking about what are their capabilities. And so as I'm making this test, which questions can what learner answer? What we do in Kenya, they tell us that if you want to have a successful exam, it should be hard enough for the bright student and easy enough for the student who's not bright. So at the end of the day, it's the same test, but it is allowing both of them to thrive in their own way. And that is what we go by. So there will be a question that the bright student will find easy, but there'll also be a question that the student that is not so bright will also find that is within their capabilities. So look at their abilities and tailor that into the items that you fit into the exam.
Do you agree, Rukia? Anything to add on that? Because this question of differentiation, I think, is really important, isn't it? We have learners with so many different needs, maybe neurodiverse learners, maybe some of them need extra time. How can you possibly assist and assess everybody with the same test, Rukia?
Yeah, I think also, just in addition to what Elizabeth said, giving more time to the time takers. And that is a practice that happens in Kenya, whereby you find that time takers are given more time. And also maybe teaching them on how to seek for help, even if it's during the assessment, whenever they need the help. I remember in a classroom that I was observing for one of the teachers through this British Council project, one teacher used a resource whereby it was teaching the learners on how to seek for help. So they did an audio on how to seek for help in the reading if they find that maybe the time that they've been given to read a comprehension and answer questions is too little. So that can be helpful, and having rubrics that also show them the expectations. What is it that is expected of them? And that can also be very helpful.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I love the way you emphasized how complex a good assessment is, because the whole topic of assessment is so complex. I really recommend that British Council course, because it's only with a course and a lot of work, like a year-long project, that you can actually get to grips with it, I think. Another question there was, is it only for Kenya? So I know you both asked for other examples from other contexts, but can we compare maybe for the last couple of minutes? Would anyone like to state how things are different in other countries? If someone would like to unmute and talk about something from there, please put your hand up and we can ask you to unmute and ask your question, or compare, because no, it's not just for Kenya, is it? And your whole point was to share your project so that people can see what you've done and apply this to other contexts. Would anyone like to compare to their context or unmute to talk about it? Or maybe Elizabeth and Rukia, do you have any experience of other contexts, assessment in other contexts? I know you've worked together with other teacher associations sometimes.
I'll leave that to Rukia.
Well, thank you. I think we sort of have similar contexts with Uganda and Tanzania because they are also moving to competency-based curriculum. And they are sort of our situation and theirs is similar. And maybe the challenges they face is in Kenya, we have used English language as a language of instruction for very many years as compared to maybe, for example, Tanzania that have been using Swahili and they are now maybe transitioning to English at the secondary school level. So you'll find that maybe the assessments that they have to use, they have to be cognizant of the level of English of the learners that they're working with. But insofar as maybe Ethiopia and the other West African countries, maybe it would be helpful if we can hear from them. I would really have loved to hear what their challenge is. Also, I saw some here who say big classrooms are challenged. I saw someone also say that formative assessment is very important because when you assess learning, you are able to make corrections that would influence the outcome in the long run, even in the summative assessment at the end.
Yeah, I think I know there are some people from Ethiopia here because they've been saying about Ethiopia, and I think you're right. Every country has a completely different system, but it would be wonderful to learn from each other because people who countries who initiate a new system, they can help the ones that are initiating it later, can't they? And then we have this final question here from Mustafa. I don't know where you're from, Mustafa. How can we collaborate with colleagues to develop more effective and consistent assessment practices? I think this is all about what you did on your project. So any suggestions for going forward from now on how we can collaborate with colleagues better? Elizabeth, Rukia?
Elizabeth, you can chime in, but I can say that we have, especially when we have a meetup in a conference whereby we have teachers from different parts of Kenya, like we had in one of the sessions. So the different teachers were giving examples of how they use the resources to come up with assessment, like the example I gave for Siaya that used AI. They usually do like exams. So they use AI to do the exams and they noticed some of the maybe deficiencies that came about insofar as AI is concerned. And they worked on how they prompt the AI to give them what they have, but they were cognizant of the fact that they might have to adjust a few things. Other teachers, for example, one shared about how they used it for inclusivity in the classroom, their assessments, how to include all learners, even in the language that they use. So when teachers look at the different contexts that were shared, then they're able to see it from a different perspective and pick maybe what they can to their context and adjust what they need to, and at times just adapt it the way it is.
It's great. Yeah, and this is exactly what we have to do, isn't it? To collaborate. Do the British Council course on assessment when it comes up again. Collaborate with people internationally there. Come to the English Connects Telegram group discussion. And this collaboration there is excellent, isn't it? Any more questions? Please bring your questions on Friday. And this is the key to solving all these problems, isn't it? Collaborating and learning from each other. So thank you so much, Rukia and Elizabeth, for a lovely, really informative, really practical webinar. Over to Steve to close.
All right, thanks so much, Rukia. Thanks, Elizabeth. I think you've actually shared some ideas here that are gonna eventually get teachers on the call thinking about assessment a bit more and maybe reflecting on how they can actually improve the way they do assessment in their own countries, in their own classrooms. Just like to thank you for also contributing through your project. I know you've been actually you are key members in making sure these are delivered both in time, but also we put the quality that's required to reach as many teachers as possible in Kenya. So thank you so much for coming in today and accepting to present a webinar about the great work that you've done. I would just like to invite everyone to we've actually dropped the link to the slides in the chat. We can actually drop it again if you like to access the slide today. You can actually do so now. We'll send you a recording of this session in the coming week, maybe on Monday. So you can actually review the content of the session, but also share a bit more widely with teachers around you. So thank you so much for attending. Thanks, Linda. And then thanks, Abel and Blessing, for being in the back, monitoring the messages, kind of moderating and making sure this space is safe. So I wish you a great weekend, and I hope to see you all on Friday next week for another Q&A session where you can ask more questions to both Rukia and Elizabeth. Good weekend, everyone. Thank you.